All right, we're going to go ahead and get this kicked off. Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Pessel. If you don't know me, I'm the health officer at the Calhoun County Public Health Department. And with us today is our medical director, Dr. William Nettleton. And Doc, I'm going to have you, before we begin answering questions, I'm going to have you just give a little bio background on who you are and what you do for us and others. And why? How involved have you been in COVID-related activities for the past year and a half? Go ahead, Doc.
Great, thanks, Eric. So I'm a graduate of Lakeview High School. My folks still live here in Battle Creek. I am a family physician at WMed, an assistant professor. I teach the residents and the medical students in the medical school, also around the patients in the hospital. And I serve as medical director for Kalamazoo County Health Department and also Calhoun County Public Health Department as well. And I'm also board certified in preventive medicine and public health. And so I chose, after residency 4 years ago, come back to serve my home community and have been working with the health department ever since. And of course, throughout our COVID-19 pandemic response. From the very beginning, in early 2020, all throughout our vaccination campaign to where we are today. So very happy to be here.
Thanks, Doc. And I know that Lucy and Kim were able to collect some questions over the past week or week and a half from some of our employees here at the county. And I think what we're going to do today is I'm going to moderate and just ask you these questions and other questions that we have received over the past, course of the last several weeks or months about the vaccine. And so if you're okay with that, I'm just going to go ahead and kick it off and ask questions. And I think to let people know that are listening, if you have a question or want to do a follow-up to something, go ahead and add that in the chat. And then I'll try to circle back and make sure that we're reviewing the chat and making sure that Dr. Nettleton can answer your question as completely as possible. So with that, Doc, I'm going to kick it off. We do have these questions categorized a little bit. We put them in different categories, one being vaccine basics and biology of the vaccine. We have the safety of the vaccine. We have effectiveness questions of the vaccine. There's legal questions of the vaccine. And then there was questions about masks and other things that had to do with vaccine. That will be probably one of our final questions of the day. So kicking it off with vaccine basics and biology, just in general, how do vaccines work?
The whole idea with the vaccine is for you to be presented with something called an antigen, which really teaches your body how to protect itself for if it was ever exposed to a virus or even a bacteria, that it's able to do so without you getting sick from either the virus or the bacteria. And with respect to COVID-19, in the United States, there are 3 different vaccines, and they're in kind of 2 different groups. So first, there are the mRNA vaccines. That's the Pfizer and the Mrna. So how do they work? So when you receive the shot in your arm, what you're receiving is a tiny kind of protein, it's also known as messenger RNA, that's surrounded by a fat layer that's uptaken by your cells. And that messenger RNA encodes for a protein, the spike protein. We've all seen that picture of the coronavirus with the red spikes hanging out. So the mRNA encodes to teach your cells how to make antibodies against the spike protein from the coronavirus. So if you ever exposed to the virus, your body says, hey, I know what that is, and now it can fight it off. So that's kind of the basics of how an mRNA vaccine works. mRNA, it's very short-lived. That's one of the reasons why it has to be stored in a so cold. You see how cold it has to be stored in those freezers, if you will, or in a deep freeze refrigerator. And that's because the mRNA is unstable. It doesn't last long at all, and even in a person's body. Then there's the Janssen vaccine or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It uses pretty much a dead type of cold virus that has, again, the mRNA inside of it, which is uptaken by a cell, and it teaches your body how to protect itself against COVID-19 if it's ever exposed to the virus. None of the vaccines are live vaccines. None of the vaccines can change your DNA.
Great, thank you for that. So sticking with the biology and vaccine basics then, what are the primary ingredients in the vaccine? And is it true that it's using aborted fetal cells? And was it tested on rats?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned a little bit about the mRNA vaccines. It's that small mRNA, which is a type of protein, a nucleic acid, and then it has that fat layer around it. That's the main ingredients. The other ingredients are salts. You know, when you come inside your body, it has to have a certain salt balance for it to kind of be uptaken by your body. And so that's what the main ingredients are. All of the ingredients can be found on the CDC website, and we can kind of put that in the chat when I have a second and find it. And also, whenever you present for your vaccine in Calhoun County, you can ask for the list of ingredients as well too. The Janssen vaccine, again, a little bit different, doesn't use mRNA, uses that type of cold virus, but very similar in terms of having the salt balance as well. With respect to the questions about what type of animal or human being this has been evaluated in, well, we can talk about that as well. So I'm going to put this in the chat here for everybody. So this is really about the manufacturer and the development. So do the COVID-19 vaccines contain fetal cells? The answer to that is no. However, some COVID-19 vaccines use what's known as a historic fetal cell line in the production or manufacturing. So the Johnson vaccine used a fetal cell line to produce and manufacture the vaccine, even though there's no fetal cells in it. The Pfizer and Mrna vaccine did not use a fetal cell line to produce or manufacture the vaccine, but a fetal cell line was used very early in the phase of production and manufacturing to confirm efficacy. So where does this all come from? You kind of hear about it in the news sometimes. Well, those cell lines come from certain COVID-19 those cell line development came from 2 elective pregnancy terminations in the early 1970s and 80s. And the reason why it's been used is that viruses grow and infect humans, tend to grow better in cells that are from humans than in animals. And that they grow well and can be stored over time in those fetal cells. The fetal cells can continue to be reproduced over time. But after that development, once the virus has grown, all the cellular debris is removed, and the vaccines do not contain those fetal cells. And then faith organizations have kind of addressed this question. And on the bottom of this handout from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, you can see in the chat are all the position statements from those different organizations as well. So more complicated question, but no fetal cells actually in the vaccines themselves. So we'll talk more about the clinical trials. These involve tens of thousands of people, of humans in the clinical trials. We'll talk about in a minute overall. And then in some small subsets, there have been some animal trials as well in terms of mice and certain types of primate as well. But the predominant evidence that goes into talking about the safety and effectiveness of the vaccines are studies in human beings.
Thank you. So a question came in from the county. What are all the side effects of the vaccine? And in parentheses, not the likelihood of getting sick, but what are all of the side effects?
Right. So the first thing I would mention is that all medications have some expected side effects, including vaccines. And so what can you expect when you receive a COVID-19 vaccine? The most common side effect is a sore arm. Other folks may get a headache. Other folks may have some chills, feel kind of run down. I'd say those are probably the most common throughout all kind of COVID-19 vaccines. So really what that is your body's way of teaching itself how to fight off the virus if ever you're exposed. And it's expected, this is your body's immune response is what it's known as when you feel those symptoms after getting your shot. It's your body's way of telling you, yep, I'm getting ready. And one of the reasons why, the mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna, they are 2-dose vaccines. Think about it as priming the pump. You're teaching your body for what the virus antibody will look like. So when you are exposed to it, it's that your body says, aha, I know what that is. I'm ready to go. After my vaccine, I had a moderate headache the day or so after. I know others have reported some chills. So that's some just a personal experience with regards to the COVID-19 vaccine.
Okay, the next question, we actually have 3 that were similar, so I'm going to ask all 3, but it's a very similar question. The first of the 3, since COVID shots are not required and do not cover all variants of COVID, why get the shot if I already was sick? Shouldn't I be immune enough? That's 1. The second question, if I had COVID, why would I need to get a shot? And a third question, how is the vaccine more effective than natural infection? Why would someone who had symptomatic COVID infection need a vaccine? Those are all similar. Can you answer that question?
Yeah. So basic question, I've had COVID before. Why get the COVID vaccine now? What's the recommendation? So throughout most of the pandemic, it's been unknown about the extent and the durability of both natural and vaccine-induced immunity. And there's been accumulating evidence over time. There's 2 different types of immunity in your body. You have the antibody response, and you have the cellular response overall. So it's been unknown, how much protection you have when you've had COVID-19 and for how long that lasts. Similarly, those investigations are ongoing for the vaccine itself. So thus far, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Food and Drug Administration, which are governmental public health agencies, in addition to a professional society, which is known as the Infectious Disease Society of America, have all recommended to indeed get your COVID-19 shot even after you've had COVID, because again, of unknown certainty about how much protection you actually have from after you've gotten COVID-19 and for how long that lasts. It's giving you that protection that the vaccine engenders.
So one of those 3 questions also had a statement that I want to make sure that is accurate. It says, since COVID shots are not required, we know that's accurate, and do not cover all variants of COVID. What do we know about the coverage with variants?
Yes, with variants, we have emerging evidence and supportive evidence that these are effective against the most common variants. So particularly, for example, B117, which was very common in Michigan for the state, for example. We know that the Janssen vaccine was actually trialed later in the pandemic in different countries with known different types of variants, like the South African variant and the Brazilian variant. And now they've changed the names of all these to Greek alphabet letters, which I still have to catch up on. Again, we see that there's effectiveness with these most common variants. And also was likely one of the reasons that gave the CDC confidence to make the recommendation to remove masking for those who are fully vaccinated as well. So we can talk a little bit more about evidence from the clinical trials and then the real world evidence for people who have been, the millions of people who have now been vaccinated and exposed to different types of variants. But that is a question that will be ongoing as more variants emerge over time.
Okay, and I want to go back and say that there was one other question that kind of went through a personal family, husband and wife, and that the one of the people know that they have antibodies. They've had COVID, they still have antibodies, and so their question was also, isn't this in essence what the vaccine does? If you get COVID and your body creates those antibodies, isn't that what the vaccine does? I think you've answered it, but did you want to expand any more on that?
more comes down to just uncertainty about the extent and durability of the vaccines. We know that the vaccine engenders a robust immune response and is highly effective. And so that's what based on what we don't know and based on what we do know. And there will be, emerging evidence that comes on. It is more difficult to do trials and studies about that cellular type immunity with bone marrow response. There's some emerging data coming out about that. Right now, it's all about getting the most protection that you have at a time when we know vaccines work and we have limited information about natural immunity.
Right. Do we know how the vaccine affects the antibodies that we already have, if we have those antibodies from previous infection?
When we think about it, we are constantly exposed to different viruses and bacteria, and your immune system is constantly being exposed to new things and making antibodies, and then your body remembering if it's exposed to that same pathogen in the future that it knows how to fight it off. So we are constantly being exposed, and we have lots and lots of different types of antibodies in our blood, and we have different cells actually inside our bones that remember how to make those antibodies if we are to expose in the future. And so it's really a non-issue about an idea about competing in antibodies. Your body is, for those of us with a robust immune system, remembering if we are exposed to a certain pathogen, virus, bacteria, to fight it off in the future.
Okay, now we're going to go down to really vaccine development. And so a question on there's a couple new vaccines that have been talked about in the media. And the question is, when will the Novovax and or Medicago vaccine be available? Do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, so I've really only seen press releases about these prospective COVID-19 vaccines. But I've also read that they plan to submit at least Novovax to FDA sometime later this year. But until this point, I really can't, provide kind of scientific public health guidance because I haven't seen stage 3 clinical trials published in a journal, and the data hasn't yet been presented to the Food and Drug Administration. So really need to wait for those next steps before we can comment on safety, effectiveness, and kind of rollout plans about those.
And there were I think there was 4 parts to that question. So basically, I think for whoever had submitted that question, it's too early. We just don't have the information yet to be able to answer that. Going back to vaccine development though, Doc, and you might have talked about this in the beginning, but how were these vaccines developed? And since we're getting into the safety as our next question, can you kind of talk about how they were developed and then how they determine safety and efficacy?
Right, and we can talk maybe a little bit about, the people have heard about Operation Warp Speed, and then really what safety and effectiveness means in clinical trials. So first, I often hear that these are experimental vaccines, and that after a drug has FDA emergency use authorization or FDA approval, they are not experimental drugs. The experiments were the clinical trials. So let's talk a little bit about how those work. So all 3 of the COVID-19 vaccines underwent rigorous clinical trials. In other words, there were tens of thousands of people in the United States, so American citizens, and also around the world that participated in these trials to evaluate both the safety and effectiveness. And those clinical trials start with safety in a small group and also look at a little bit of effectiveness, move to the next group with a larger group, look at safety. And then the last one, again, looks at safety and really is looking at effectiveness of the vaccine. And during clinical trials, effectiveness, the word we use is efficacy, how well it works. And so tens of thousands of people got the vaccine in those clinical trials. Tens of thousands of people didn't get the vaccine in those trials. And what they looked at was the safety of the vaccine in those trials, and then the outcomes. And the outcomes in those clinical trials for adults was, do these vaccines prevent hospitalization? Do these vaccines prevent death? And the profound answer to those questions was yes. These vaccines prevent hospitalization and prevent death, and they're highly effective at doing so. And also with regards to the safety profile, that these vaccines are also safe. And then we're going to kind of dive down into that a little bit. And there are those 3 stages of clinical trials that go through that evaluation. We can dive down into that a little bit. And then you hear about this Operation Warp Speed. And I hear sometimes about that the vaccine was rushed. And so I'm a little uncomfortable with that. And so let's talk about the mRNA technology, for example. So mRNA technology has been around we've had decades of research. And then in the last few years has really been harnessed for kind of vaccine development, using, thinking about different other types of vaccines. It's also been using cancer research as well. So the platforms were existing for when the SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, emerged in January of 2020. So in January 2020, the genetic code for the virus that causes COVID-19 was posted online by scientists, and scientists all over the world then had a jump start on how to begin the development of the vaccine. Knew the genetic code, can take the next step to do so, instead of having to grow it in a lab, for example, and do some additional steps before getting there. Already could have a jump start on it to begin those human clinical trials. And then in Operation Warp Speed, I've also heard about, what was the governmental involvement, the non-governmental involvement in that approach. And I can kind of share kind of my screen here for a second, just about what Operation Warp Speed kind of looks like. Because I know this is a common question. People see my screen?
Yes.
There we go. So this is from the Department of Defense's website, and about what the typical process looks like for kind of vaccine development overall. So oftentimes what was taken is that steps were done in parallel. So there was, at every step of the way, safety was not compromised. Instead, things were done in parallel instead of done in series. And so since we had an objective that we desired to accomplish, American researchers, American medical researchers, along with other partners, really wanted to do these studies in a more accelerated fashion and doing it parallel instead of in series. And you can see what that process looks like about doing those clinical trials. Instead of stacking them up against together, we're going to do them side by side and evaluate safety and effectiveness at the same time. And then we're also going to be talking with the CDC, talking with the FDA at the same time, instead of doing those things in parallel. In series. So that was kind of the whole leapfrog approach to the Operation Warp Speed, which is really the funding mechanism, but also thinking about the distribution process for when the vaccine was ready. Because that was a hard pivot that came around in December of 2020 about how now to, once the FDA issued its emergency use authorization, again, after evaluation of those clinical trials with tens of thousands of people, to now get the vaccine out to people and at the local public health department level to get it going. So that's just a little bit of background about what that looked like.
Okay. So the next question is, for women planning to have children in 1 to 2 years, how do we know the vaccine is safe for mom and the baby? And also a follow-up with that is, if the father is vaccinated, could that affect mom or baby too?
Yeah, so I'm going to take 2 approaches to that question. Question about COVID-19 vaccination and pregnancy, and also about a question about fertility in the COVID-19 vaccine. So let's start with the first. So the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, ACOG, recommends that all pregnant women be offered the COVID-19 vaccine. And so you could think about this as you're a mom making a decision to be vaccinated, is knowing the following information. That we do know that pregnant women are at higher risk for complications of COVID-19. So for example, I've taken care of a pregnant patient on oxygen after delivery because that she had COVID-19. So there's increased risk for those who are pregnant and get COVID-19. And then let's also think about what's your risk in terms of your exposure to those who may have COVID-19, especially if you work with a lot of people, you have a forward-facing job, that increases your risk of COVID-19. And then it's thinking about, what's your community prevalence of COVID-19 when assessing your risk. Our rates have really come down in Calhoun for example, when we compared to April, when we were having another surge and peak again, but we still have community transmission occurring. So you can think about all of that information that goes into your risk assessment. Now, in the clinical trials, pregnant women weren't deliberately included in the clinical trials, but we did have pregnant women, women who became pregnant during the clinical trials that didn't plan to, and those folks have been followed. And now we have millions of women who have reproductive age and who are pregnant, where we're gaining more data, and we're not seeing any safety concerns for mom or baby at this time with regard to the COVID-19 vaccine. So that's what I would kind of frame for pregnant patients who have questions about the COVID-19 vaccine. Then my second question is about fertility, about long-term concerns about fertility. And I want to kind of frame this in two different ways too. I think this is often lost in the shuffle. There are questions about evidence. Evidence is based on information that comes from scientific studies and clinical trials. And that's different from scientific expertise. But we often use these in everyday medical and public health practice. So our experience with all other types of vaccines is that we haven't had any vaccine in our history that has had a fertility issue, a long-term fertility issue as well. So that's the first thing based on experience. And thus far, with respect to our evidence of COVID-19 vaccines, we also haven't seen an issue with fertility in women who are females of reproductive age and have had COVID-19 vaccine. We haven't seen that in the data as well. I think overall, this question, where this all come from, there was this story online about the spike protein and that somehow having a cross-reactivity with the placenta, and that's being an issue for fertility. And this rumor kind of went online. And then so kind of we can parse that down a little bit. And I think it was on this idea that, you know, those red spikes you see on the famous picture of the COVID-19 vaccine will somehow cross-react. And we know that the vaccines encode for the spike protein. And that was the idea of how the vaccine somehow could influence the placenta and cause issues with fertility. But again, that has not been parsed out in the data of the vaccines. Now, if that were true, women who have actually had COVID-19, in other words, been exposed to the spike protein on the surface of the coronavirus, I would expect, scientists would expect, then we would see fertility issues in women who actually got COVID-19. And we don't. We have not seen that par out in the many women of reproductive age who have actually gotten COVID-19. So I think that's more of a kind of a dispelling the myth surrounding that issue of fertility and the evidence so far around the COVID-19 vaccine.
And just a quick follow-up to one of those questions. If the father is vaccinated, could that affect mom or baby?
Well, I would say it gives protective benefit for your family, for an adult in your household to be vaccinated. That protects other people around you. But with respect to a question about individual fertility, I don't see. I would say no. I wouldn't say that to my patients overall, and I wouldn't see that as a clinical concern. What I would see is it's a benefit for the household to be fully vaccinated.
Okay. And then it kind of goes along the same lines, but if the, how can we say the vaccine is safe in the long term when there hasn't been an opportunity for such studies or data? You touched on it, but can you answer that specifically?
Yeah, I come back to the experience and expertise. That's not our experience with other vaccines. We don't see long-term consequences for a variety of concerned potential outcomes. We just don't see that in other types of vaccines. And, the reason for vaccinating people during a pandemic is that it's an emergency, and we know that these vaccines are safe and highly effective at preventing hospitalization and death. So it is, from a clinical and ethical perspective, to use these vaccines, which we have a tremendous amount of evidence from those clinical trials from, to save lives. It wouldn't make clinical or ethical sense to wait 2 years down the line to say, you know what, we've done an evidence-based follow-up study long term, and we still don't see any safety signals. Now we can use the vaccine. By that time, hundreds of thousands of people would have died and been hospitalized. And so that's the reason why this has been used as in the pandemic under FDA emergency use authorization. But again, just to reemphasize, to get to that point, it was a rigorous clinical trials had to get there to evaluate the safety and effectiveness of the vaccine in the first place. And then now we have real world evidence and experience with the vaccine being in hundreds of millions of people. And we had that real world evidence of the safety effectiveness of this vaccine as well.
Thank you for that answer. Is there a place where we are seeing longer term effects regarding COVID?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, we have our patients who are telling us, those who have gotten COVID-19, you hear about this long haul COVID. We hear about folks who have lost or have impaired taste or smell, for example, or those who have a prolonged cough, or now have this kind of vague fatigue that they've been experiencing, even after mild to moderate COVID. So we do actually see some of those long-term effects occurring in patients who actually had mild to moderate COVID-19 disease.
So not from the vaccine, but from the disease itself.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I think we moved down to effectiveness, Dr. Nettleton. Do you happen to know what percentage of people who've gotten vaccinated have subsequently gotten COVID?
Really good question. And so this comes back to those kind of it's known as those breakthrough cases. And the short answer is it's very rare for that to occur, but it's not unexpected. It's expected that we have some so-called breakthrough cases. Even with a highly effective vaccine, and we're talking about 95% full effective at preventing hospitalization and death for adults in those with the Pfizer and the Mrna vaccine, for example. So again, it's expected to still have some of those breakthrough cases, but it is also expected for those rare cases that you're not most likely not going to be hospitalized and most likely not going to die. Yes, there have been some very rare cases of still hospitalization and death from COVID-19, even after being fully vaccinated, but those are very, very rare cases. And we think about what I would say the denominator. And so when you hear about some of these cases, mild breakthrough or regular breakthrough cases, you see hundreds of cases in the news. But then you think about, well, out of how many? And oftentimes it's out of hundreds of millions or tens of millions, which makes it a very, very small rate. And again, most likely going to be less severe disease, which is the point of the vaccine.
This is a very similar question, but I want to ask it because I think this one came directly from a county employee. So once vaccinated, it's a multiple part question. Once vaccinated, can I still contract the virus? I think you've talked about that. Can I still carry it and pass it on to another person once vaccinated? Overall, what is the advantage for a healthy, relatively young person to be vaccinated?
Yeah, two parts. So it's very unlikely that you're able to spread disease like you would if you were unvaccinated. That's kind of the point of being vaccinated. And it's likely the point of what gave the CDC confidence to say, hey, those who are fully vaccinated, you can remove your masks because we are interrupting the flow of transmission. Those studies are hard to do, but I mean, we have those real world evidence now that it's been emerging, and it's given us confidence to take off our masks for those who are fully vaccinated. So again, it's also framing it as rarely possible, but in the grand scheme of things, we are interrupting the spread of disease by being fully vaccinated. And then there's a second question you had there, Eric.
What is the advantage for a healthy, relatively young person to be vaccinated?
Yeah, so I can share my personal experience with that. I'm a young, healthy guy. Why did I get vaccinated? So one, I wanted to protect my family. I wanted to protect my kids and my wife. That was my first motivation. And then I want to protect my parents as well. And as a physician, I also had a duty to my patients. I wanted to protect my patients who are more vulnerable and may not have had the opportunity to be vaccinated yet. So those were all the reasons why I did, to protect my family, and also a duty to my patients. And I also felt a duty to my community. The unique thing about a vaccine, unlike other medications, is that it not only helps yourself, it helps those around you. And for me, that community sense is important, but especially the protection of my family. I think about then those who are 12 and above, for example, who are now eligible to be vaccinated. Why would a teenager, for example, be motivated to be vaccinated? And it's true, there's different levels of risk. We know that those who are older or have underlying medical conditions are at far higher risk for hospitalization and death. That's not true for a younger person. Very low risk of hospitalization, very, very low risk of death from COVID-19. Rare cases still happen, though, for hospitalization. Cases do occur for this multi-system inflammatory syndrome that kids do end up in the hospital for this inflammatory response after getting COVID-19, even a mild case. So the vaccine would prevent that. It also would enable a person to not quarantine after being exposed. There's no need to be quarantine after be fully vaccinated. There's not an indication to test if you don't have symptoms after you're exposed as well. So those are all reasons to inform a person's decision to be vaccinated.
I'm just seeing if there's any more in this category. Dr. Nettleton, if the vaccine works, why are vaccinated individuals worried about the non-vaccinated people? If it works, then the vaccinated people should be protected.
Yeah, really good question. I mean, the vaccine does work. It works really, really well. And that's why we're here talking about it today. And then we think about a couple different groups. Not everyone has had the opportunity to be fully vaccinated. That includes our youth, less than the age of 12. And I also think about those who are immunocompromised as well, those that have decreased immune systems overall. Strongly recommend those folks get vaccinated, but we don't know how well they may be less protected than others since they don't have the same immune response, perhaps, to the vaccine. So thinking about those folks who are vulnerable, thinking about our youth, those are reasons to think about the other, to think about our neighbor who may be more vulnerable to disease. And as this pandemic has shown, I personally also see it as an issue of citizenship, as being a member of a community, that a communicable disease, an infectious disease, not only affects myself, but it affects my neighbor, my colleague, my fellow workers as well. So those are all the reasons to consider being vaccinated, I believe.
Will the COVID-19 shot be like the flu shot where you must get it every year?
Yeah, also a really good question. I don't see that being an issue. You hear this thing about booster shots in the news. I don't think that's going to be a thing for 2021. It may be a thing for 2022. The more time the virus has to circulate in human beings who are unvaccinated or have decreased immune systems, the more opportunity the virus has to change over time. That's where variants come from. And if those emerge, then we may need to change the strategy about how to address that. Again, we haven't seen that yet with the most common variants, but it may be something in the future. We also may learn, as the studies are ongoing, about how long, again, that natural or vaccine-induced immunity lasts. And once we have more information about that and the potential for variants, then I think that's going to inform decisions about boosters, if you will. Influenza virus is a very different virus than the SARS-CoV-2, but those are the considerations to see.
Great. So we're going to move into a legal question. If I have a medical reason to not get the vaccine, does Hipaa protect me from disclosing that information?
Yeah, there are a couple different layers to that question. So I think the first is to think about what actually the medical contraindication is. There is really one medical contraindication and when I say medical contraindication, that means a reason to not receive the vaccine from a medical perspective. And that is if you have a history of severe allergy or known as anaphylaxis to any of the ingredients of the vaccine. And Victor can maybe find the CDC slot where it lists the vaccines, and we can put that in the chat. But that's really the only medical reason not to receive the vaccine. The other precaution is for those who have actually got the antibody therapy, someone who actually got COVID-19 and then had the IV with the antibodies. We try to delay 90 days before vaccinating that person who's having to evaluate the safety of the effectiveness of really the effectiveness of that vaccine in those folks. So that's their main reason not to get the vaccine. So then what about this Hipaa? This often comes up a lot. And so can businesses ask me about, or my employer ask me about vaccination status, and can Hipaa be a reason not to disclose that information? The answer is no. Hipaa covers what's known as protected entities. And so these are like your doctor's office or your health insurance company. So when you're walking into Walmart and I don't know, they want to know your vaccine status, they can ask the question. What Hipaa protects is for Walmart to call up your doctor's office, or for your neighbor to call your doctor's office and say, hey, give me Dr. Nettleton's medical record so I can know all about him and his medical issues. That's what Hipaa protects. It doesn't address someone asking a question about your vaccination status.
Right. And finally, we're going to talk about masks and the vaccine. And there's two questions. And what I'd like to do, Dr. Nettleton, is I'd like to read both questions and then have you give your answer to the kind of the reason why some have to continue to wear a mask, even though they're vaccinated, and then many people don't have to wear a mask once vaccinated. So the question is, what is the time frame for no longer having to wear masks in congregate care facilities, such as the juvenile home? That is one question. The other question, a little longer, but on the same topic. In February of 2020 email, Dr. Anthony Fauci wrote, masks are really for infected people to prevent them from spreading infection to people who are not infected, rather than protecting uninfected people from acquiring infection. The typical mask you buy at a drugstore is not really effective in keeping out virus, end quote. If the vaccine is truly effective, then why would I still be required to wear a mask while working in the jail?
Yeah, so good question. So a couple of different layers to these questions too. One is on how physicians and public health professionals make decisions and recommendations. And then also about how I'd frame things in terms of risk reduction. So I'll take that kind of one at a time. So in a normal time, say outside of a pandemic, the nature of scientific progress is that we learn new information. We do additional studies. And with that additional information, doctors, scientists, public health professionals change recommendations, change the way we practice medicine and practice public health. That is true for just basic medical practice. You want your doctor using the most up-to-date information that they have to make decisions, recommendations for you. And that's just the nature of science, and things change over time, sometimes slowly, sometimes really quickly. And in a pandemic, when the virus is new, that process is accelerated, just accelerated. Every day there is new information that is emerging. That changes. I remember sometimes things in the morning would change in the afternoon or by the end of the week. And that's just the nature of accumulating evidence. And as that evidence accumulates, we adjust and change our recommendations, both on an individual and a population level. That's how science works overall. So, referencing back in February 2020 about masks, as you remember, there was both, uncertainty and also lack of a cultural background in terms of expectations of wearing masks. You know, Asian countries far before the United States had been using masks for other types of respiratory viruses. It wasn't the cultural expectation in the United States. Also, it was emerging science at that time as well in early 2020 about masks. And there was then emerging data about what's known as source control. When I wear my mask, I am protecting you. When you wear your mask, you're protecting me. That was source control as well, meaning that we knew that likely the primary driver was respiratory droplets. We're learning later more about these aerosols, that the virus, very, very, very small, was located within these droplets that would be projected out of your mouth when you talk, sing, shout, etc. And so the mask would prevent those droplets from spreading on others, source control. Then evidence started to emerge about others, and we're talking about cloth masks, surgical masks, that it also protected you as the wearer as well. That was also an evolution as well. So protection of your neighbor, protection of yourself began to emerge, again, with more evidence, with more individual and population-based risk assessment as well. And then there was this, I think oftentimes this confusion about, again, risk reduction, that somehow this is binary, where it's either yes or no, overall, black or white. And that's just not how risk works. So when I'm counseling my patients, in the doctor's office, my duty is to that one patient in front of me. When I serve as our community's public health physician, I'm taking into account the entire population, the entire community. So even if there is some reduced risk, so it's not 100%, but let's say it's 70% or 50%, that risk reduction, when applied to a population, really matters, really, really matters, particularly when we're in the middle of a pandemic. And I think that's a concept that's been very, very hard to grasp overall. So then we translate that to now where we're at with vaccinations and wearing masks. So those who are fully vaccinated, now the CDC recommends, and the state and local health have endorsed, that those individuals can remove their masks. So the question is, well, then why the exception for transportation, for congregate settings like a correctional facility, and for hospitals? So, and in healthcare, I'm wearing a mask when I'm in clinic or I'm rounding in the hospital. And it comes back to that risk reduction. Yes, we know that the vaccines work really, really well. But now we're in an environment where there's additional risk. There's more vulnerable people. There are people who are closer together. So even though the vaccine works really well, in those environments, we have another tool at our disposal to further reduce that risk in an environment where we know the viruses can spread more easily because we're closer together, and we know it's in a population that may be more vulnerable for severe outcomes. And so that's the public health recommendation, the rationale, to use an additional tool we have in our toolbox to reduce that risk in addition to vaccination.
So if I could kind of bring that from another perspective, Dr. Nettleton. So because these questionnaires work in that congregate care setting where there's more people closer together that maybe are at a higher risk, it's because of that working with is why the recommendation is they still have to wear a mask right now, even though they can be fully vaccinated.
Correct.
But that is only while they're working. The recommendation is also that if they're out and about, want to go to a restaurant, want to go to a movie, want to go, see a play, the recommendation is they don't have to wear a mask if they're fully vaccinated, correct?
Correct.
So it's only in the workplace because of the congregate setting.
Yeah. And you can even think about, there's different settings of risk. Outdoors is far less risk than indoors. But if you were at a concert, all right, and you are like this, and you got 100 people around you who are piled onto you, even though you're outside, there's additional risk in that setting because you're so close together on top of each other for a longer period of time. That's much different than being spread out on a breezy day outside. And that's just an illustration of different risk.
Great. So that comes to I believe, the end of the questions. I see Lucy's on here. Kim is still on here. Is there any additional questions that you guys have heard that you would like us to try to answer? We didn't get anything in chat.
I didn't receive anything else.
Nobody's received anything else. So
I
are
can
we
talk a
good
little bit
then,
about the
you guys?
pause with the Janssen vaccine. I know that comes up a lot. What was that all about? That caused a lot of uncertainty and questions with the Johnson vaccine. So why did the pause happen and overall? It demonstrated that there is a surveillance system in place that is monitoring to pick up those so-called safety signals. So in females of reproductive age, 18 to 49, scientists, CDC professionals noticed that, hey, there seems to be an association with severe blood clots, including the brain, other parts of the body, some that may be associated with death. And out of the millions of Johnson vaccine at that time, there was 7 to 11, I think eventually 15, and said, hey, we're noticing something here. Let's do a pause so we can further evaluate that data. And so the pause happened to communicate to doctors to say, hey, we're observing this. We want you as doctors to be aware of this possible association. And by the way, for this type of blood clot, we recommend a different treatment option. So part of the pause was to communicate to doctors about this new information. Be aware of an alternate treatment. The second was to dive down deep into that data to look at whether there was an association or not. And the third was to make a decision about, okay, once we've looked at the data, do we continue recommending the vaccine for all populations? Do we continue recommend the vaccination for a certain age group or group? Or do we third make a recommendation to continue using the medication, to not use the vaccine at all? Those were kind of the options. And the conclusion was, let's make a recommendation that the benefits for the individual and the population based on the review of the data, based on risk assessment, outweighs the risk. And let's communicate for women who are 18 to 49 that there is a rare but serious association perhaps with the Johnson vaccine. And that's when the pause was lifted, and that was the public health recommendation. So I just wanted to share that because that often comes up. And that association with severe blood clots does not exist for the mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer or the Mrna vaccine.
Doc, the fact that they were able to pause the Johnson & Johnson in the first place is indicative of those safety measures that you talked about, correct?
Yes, it demonstrates that data is being evaluated, monitored and evaluated.
And that's happening every day since we started vaccinating back in December with all the vaccines that are currently on the market.
Yes, and all those safety steps were never compromised during the actual clinical trials, even before the FDA authorization as well. So it's before authorization and then after authorization, and when it's used in millions of people overall.
Okay, well, Doctor, I think thank you for your very thorough response, and hopefully this will help some folks who maybe were questioning still or kind of at a wait and see, thought process that, I just want to know a little bit more about this before I get vaccinated, or, maybe they had heard some things. And I think, what would be your final closing recommendation for folks who haven't been vaccinated yet? What would be your recommendation for them moving forward?
Well, I think it's normal to have questions. I mean, it's normal to feel some reluctance, some hesitance. And I think it's normal to have those questions. But we're still in the pandemic. And again, these vaccines have been determined to be safe and effective. And even though our rates may be a lot lower right now than they were, for example, in April when we had a surge, or in October, November when we had a surge, time to get vaccinated is now. Because those persons who are unvaccinated will continue to be at risk, in that the choice to be vaccinated also enables those freedoms, the freedom to feel confident that you won't be ill, that your loved ones will be protected as well, and that we can continue to get back to the sense of normalcy in our daily lives that we had prior to the pandemic.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think that's going to be the end of our presentation. And Dr. Nettleton, thank you very much. And Kim and Lucy, thank you for pulling together the questions. And with that, we thank everybody and have a good day.